Some knocks on the door come like warnings, others, like ghosts from an old life. That night, Mark's knock sounded like both. It had been over a year since I'd last seen him, the kind of friend you fall out of orbit with, not out of malice, but because life quietly drifts you apart. We used to be inseparable once. Study nights that bled into dawn, bad beer, reckless plans for a future we thought we could command. And now here he was, standing on my doorstep, soaked from the rain that had been falling all afternoon, with a bag that looked far too small to hold a life. He gave a sheepish smile, the kind that carried more apology than hope. "Hey," he said. His voice was hoarse, tired. "I'm kind of in a bad spot." I didn't make him explain. Not on the threshold, not with water dripping off his jacket and onto my clean floor. Instead, I stepped aside, a silent invitation. Old instincts, I suppose, the ones that tell you to offer shelter first, ask questions later. Inside, the air smelled like the lemon candles I always lit after work. It was warm, safe, and watching Mark shuffle in, trying to make himself small, I felt a knot of guilt twist in my chest. How fragile he looked. How easy it would be to say yes. "Just for a few days," he said quickly, seeing the hesitation flicker across my face. "Until I figure something out." He didn't have to beg. I was already nodding before the words fully left his mouth. I set him up on the couch, bringing out an extra blanket, one of the good ones I usually kept folded neatly in the linen closet. I offered a fresh towel, the Wi-Fi password, even a spare toothbrush from the emergency pack I kept for guests. Mark smiled with a gratitude that almost looked like shame. We talked a little, just enough to fill the spaces between the obvious questions. He told me about losing his job, a startup that folded almost overnight, leaving him without severance, without warning. His roommate, not willing to cover the rent on their own, had already found someone new. No job, no home, no plan. As he spoke, I kept nodding, making the right noises, pretending not to notice how lost he sounded. The city can be cruel to those who stumble. We both knew that. Later, long after I retreated to my room and closed the door, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks and sighs of a second heartbeat under my roof. It was only supposed to be a few days. Only a few. At first, it was easy enough to pretend nothing had changed. I went to work. Mark stayed behind. When I came home, he'd be there, half watching television, half scrolling through his phone, feet tucked under the blanket I had once neatly folded. Every night he told me he was working on it. Applications sent, emails drafted, interviews lined up, maybe. But the proof of it never quite made itself known. Days melted into each other. 3 became 5. 5 blurred into 10. And somehow, the spare toothbrush became a permanent fixture beside mine. His jacket, once hung politely by the door, now lounged casually over the back of my dining chair. His shoes, kicked off carelessly, greeted me before I could even step into the living room. I tried to tell myself it was fine. Mark was going through a rough patch. Anyone would be shaken. It wasn't like he was a bad guest, not exactly. Yet small things gnawed at me, like mice quietly chewing holes through the fabric of comfort. Dirty dishes left to dry in the sink. Takeout containers stacked in my trash can, forgotten. The faint smell of unwashed clothes that clung to the cushions no matter how many candles I lit. It wasn't just the clutter. It was the way my home, the one place where everything made sense, began to feel like someone else's territory. Mark sprawled across the couch as if it belonged to him. He commandeered my Netflix account, breezing through shows I'd been saving for myself. He borrowed my favorite hoodie without asking, left crumbs between the pages of my books, adjusted the thermostat to his liking. And still, I said nothing. Because what was I supposed to say? That his presence, once a kindness, once a favor, was beginning to press against me like a weight I hadn't agreed to carry for this long? Some nights I lay awake, hearing the faint clatter of him rummaging in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. Other nights I found myself creeping into my own bathroom, heart pounding, irrationally afraid of bumping into the shadow of someone who no longer felt like a guest but not quite like a roommate either. In between all that silence, one bitter seed quietly planted itself in my chest. When is he planning to leave? It took just one moment, a small one, almost laughably trivial, for the weight of it all to tip. It was a Sunday morning, the kind I used to savor, quiet, slow, coffee in hand, a book balanced on my knees, sunlight pouring into the living room. My ritual. My peace. Mark was already awake, stretched lazily across the couch, bowls and plates scattered around him like trophies from a night I hadn't been part of. I barely noticed at first, stepping over discarded socks, brushing aside the low hum of the TV. But then I saw it. My coffee table, scratched. A deep, ugly mark gouged across the polished wood I had saved months to buy. A careless act. A cup without a coaster, a plate dragged without thought. And when I asked, carefully, too carefully, Mark only shrugged. "Relax," he said, without even looking away from the screen. "It's just a table. Just a table." The words rang in my ears, sharp and sour. It wasn't just the table. It wasn't just the clutter, or the smell, or the endless parade of promises to figure things out. It was the casual way he dismissed what mattered to me. My space, my comfort, my rules, as if he had some unspoken claim over them now. That afternoon, I sat him down. Not angrily, not dramatically. Just two old friends, sitting across from each other with a wide, aching distance between them. "I think," I said slowly, measuring every word, "it's time we figured out when you're moving on. You've had some time to breathe. I need my space back." For a moment, Mark said nothing. He stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. And then, the twist, sharp and unexpected. His face crumpled into something raw and ugly. "So that's it," he said, voice low. "You're kicking me out? After everything?" I tried to explain. Tried to make him understand that this wasn't betrayal, it wasn't cruelty, it was survival. My home had stopped feeling like mine. I needed it back before I started resenting not just him, but myself too. Mark didn't want to hear it. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath about fake friends, about how he should have known better. The guilt hit hard. It always does when you hurt someone who once trusted you. But underneath the guilt was a steady, pulsing relief I couldn't ignore. For the first time in weeks, I could see the outline of my own life again. Faint, but waiting. Mark left the next morning. No dramatic farewell, no slammed doors or shouted accusations. Just the low shuffle of his feet across the hallway, the muted thud of his bag dropping against the floor. I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, heavy movements of a friendship folding itself into something unrecognizable. When I finally emerged hours later, the apartment felt different. Colder, somehow. Too clean. Too still. The hoodie he had borrowed hung loosely over the arm of the couch. A forgotten pair of socks slumped in the corner like tiny, defeated flags. The faintest trace of his cheap cologne still clung to the air, a ghostly reminder that someone else had, for a time, occupied this life with me. I spent the afternoon putting the apartment back together, throwing away the empty cartons, washing the dishes that weren't mine, scrubbing the scratch on the table, though I knew it would never quite disappear. It wasn't anger that kept my hands busy, it was something softer. Sadness, maybe. Or mourning. Not just for the lost friendship, but for the person I used to be. The one who believed kindness alone could carry the weight of two people's broken lives. In the days that followed, I started hearing whispers. Mutual friends reaching out, cautious, careful. Mark had told them his version, that I had thrown him out onto the street without mercy, that I had abandoned him when he needed me most. Some believed him. Some didn't. But strangely, I found I didn't care as much as I thought I would. I knew the truth, the quiet truth that never makes for good stories. That sometimes, protecting yourself looks cruel to those who have learned to take without giving back. I hadn't failed Mark. I had simply stopped failing myself. And though the apartment still felt a little too big, a little too hollow, I knew I would fill it again. With laughter that was mine. With quiet mornings and coffee cups set gently on polished wood. With peace that didn't ask me to bleed for it.
There was a time when I thought fairy tales might be real after all. It was a rainy afternoon in October when I first met Owen, a chance encounter at a bookstore where we both reached for the same worn copy of The Great Gatsby. He laughed first, a low, easy sound that melted away the awkwardness between two strangers. I remember thinking, he feels like home. Our first few months together were blissfully simple. We spent weekends wandering through flea markets, cooking elaborate meals we were too clumsy to perfect, and sitting for hours by the river, sharing our hopes for the future. He would tuck a strand of hair behind my ear when he thought I wasn't looking. He would send me playlists for no reason at all. It felt effortless. Natural. I met his mother, Mrs. Carlyle, on a golden Sunday afternoon. She had Owen's smile, but none of his softness. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp, weighing me in some private, silent calculation. Still, she was polite enough, asking questions about my family, my career, my education. I chalked up her briskness to nerves or natural protectiveness. After all, what mother wouldn't want the best for her son? At first, it was just little things. I canceled dinner because Mom needed help moving a bookshelf. A sudden change of plans because Mom wants me to come over tonight. Tiny cracks, so small that if you blinked, you could pretend they weren't there at all. And I did. For a long time, I did. Because Owen would always come back to me with that same easy laugh, that same warmth, and the same whispered promises that I was the one he wanted, that nothing and no one could change that. At least, that's what I believed then. The cracks didn't shatter overnight. They widened slowly, almost imperceptibly, like ice creeping across a winter lake. It was little moments at first, the kind you can excuse when you're in love. We had planned a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin upstate, just the two of us. I spent days choosing the perfect place, a small wooden house by a frozen lake, fireplaces in every room, a stack of classic novels waiting in the corner. I pictured us wrapped in blankets, trading stories, falling asleep to the crackle of firewood. But the night before we were meant to leave, Owen called. His voice was apologetic, hesitant. "Hey, babe. Mom twisted her ankle this morning. She's feeling pretty down about it. I think I should stay close, just in case she needs anything." I hesitated. The suitcase sat packed at the foot of my bed, tickets printed and tucked neatly into a folder. But how could I say no? His mother was hurt. What kind of person would I be to begrudge him that? "Of course," I said. "She needs you." And I meant it. At least, I wanted to. We didn't reschedule the trip. It simply disappeared, like smoke from a candle snuffed out too soon. There were other moments, too. When we went out to dinner, he'd check his phone constantly for her texts. When we talked about moving in together someday, he'd mention needing to find a place close enough for Mom to drop by easily. Every dream I spun in my mind, of lazy Sunday mornings, shared secrets in a home of our own, began to fray at the edges. Still, I stayed. Because when he smiled at me across the table, when he brushed his hand against mine like a secret only we shared, it was easy to pretend. To believe that I was enough. It's funny how love can make you blind to the things you know deep down are going to hurt you. It was during the spring that the fault lines became impossible to ignore. Owen and I had been talking, in that careful, tentative way couples do, about taking the next step, maybe moving in together officially. I found a beautiful apartment, high ceilings, sun-drenched windows, just a block from the art museum where we had spent our first anniversary. I remember the excitement bubbling in my chest as I sent him the listing. I imagined us painting walls in the wrong shades, arguing over where the couch should go, building a life together one coffee-stained morning at a time. He texted back almost immediately. "Looks amazing. Let me show Mom and get her thoughts." For a moment, I stared at the message, feeling something cold unfurl inside me. I had never thought to ask for anyone else's permission to be happy. The next evening, we met at our favorite cafe, the one with ivy creeping up the brick walls and music always humming low in the background. He looked distracted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, avoiding my eyes. "She thinks it's too far," he said finally. "She said if there's an emergency, she wouldn't be able to get to me quickly." Emergency. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. Are we planning our life around emergencies now? I tried to keep my voice light, teasing. But he just shrugged. I don't want her to feel abandoned. Abandoned. The irony twisted inside me like a knife. I wanted to scream that I was the one who felt abandoned. Every day, a little more. Instead, I smiled, small and tight, and let the dream of the sunlit apartment drift away like a balloon cut loose into the sky. More weekends slipped by. Every invitation from me was countered by a reason why he needed to stay near home. A leaking faucet. A broken light bulb. A lonely Sunday. Each excuse wrapped itself tighter around our relationship, squeezing the life from it in slow, invisible ways. There were nights I lay awake beside him, wondering if there would ever come a moment when he would choose me, not as a rebellion, not as a favor, but simply because he wanted to. I already knew the answer. But some truths are too heavy to carry until they are forced into your arms. Loneliness is a strange thing. You can be wrapped in someone's arms and still feel like you're standing outside in the cold, forehead pressed against the glass, looking in on a life you're not allowed to touch. I stopped asking Owen to choose. Stopped suggesting trips, stopped sending him apartment listings, stopped dreaming aloud about the future. It was easier to build a quiet wall around my heart than to watch it be chipped away piece by piece. It was around then that I met Daniel. He worked with me, a colleague at first, a friend second, an unexpected balm to the aching hollow that had formed inside me. He didn't mean to step into the spaces Owen had left empty. He simply listened, really listened, in a way I hadn't realized I was starving for. A casual conversation over coffee turned into long, winding talks after work. Not about anything monumental, just life, memories, little hopes tucked away for safer days. With Daniel, I felt visible again. Not something to be managed. Not a secondary character in someone else's life. Just me. There was never a moment where a line was deliberately crossed. No whispered declarations, no forbidden touches. But emotions, I learned, can betray you long before your body ever does. One evening, after a long day blurred into another, we found ourselves sitting in the empty office lounge, the golden light of the setting sun pooling around us like honey. I laughed at something he said, a real, unexpected laugh that shook the dust from my ribs. And in that moment, the ache inside me shifted, from hunger to something dangerously close to longing. He looked at me with a softness that asked nothing and promised nothing, only saw me. Truly saw me. I left first. I always left first. Because no matter how sweet the silence between us became, I wore a ring Owen had never actually offered and a promise he had never actually made. But in the corners of my heart, something had already broken loose. Something I could no longer pretend I could fix. The truth, once loose, has a way of finding its own voice. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. There were no secret messages, no damning photos. Just a change in me that Owen, even in his distracted, half-there way, couldn't ignore. One evening, as we sat on the worn couch in his living room, a game show flickering silently in the background, he turned to me with a strange expression. An uncertainty. A suspicion. "You seem different lately," he said, cautious, as though afraid of the answer. I stared at him, at the man I had loved, at the boy who had never truly left his mother's house, and realized that there was nothing left I could give that wouldn't be stolen from me in the end. "I'm tired, Owen," I said softly. Not angry. Not accusing. Just exhausted. Tired of what? Of waiting to be first. The silence between us was louder than any shouting match could have been. His face twisted, wounded in a way that almost made me falter. "Are you seeing someone else?" he asked, the words brittle, sharp-edged. "No," I said, and it was the truth. But also not the whole truth. I hadn't given my body to anyone else. But my heart? My heart had long ago begun to drift toward the one place where it felt wanted. He accused me anyway. Of betrayal, of disloyalty, of giving up too easily. He spoke of sacrifices, of loyalty, of how I should have understood his bond with his mother better. And maybe he was right. Maybe I should have been stronger. Maybe I should have loved him enough to live forever in second place. But sitting there, with the ghosts of all the moments we had lost haunting the air between us, I realized I didn't want to spend a lifetime fighting for scraps of someone's love. I wanted to be chosen. Freely, joyfully, without conditions. And he wanted a partner who could accept always being second to someone else. Neither of us was wrong. We just weren't right for each other. So here I am, writing this now. AITA for letting my heart find comfort in someone who saw me first, when my own boyfriend never really could.
People always talk about love like it's a choice. Like you sit down with a list, weigh pros and cons, and decide to give someone your forever. But with Nathan, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. We met at a museum fundraiser. I was supposed to be networking. Instead, I found myself listening to a man in a corduroy jacket talk passionately about how cities breathe through the buildings people never notice. I couldn't stop smiling. He was nothing like the men I grew up around. My world was private schools, old money, polished smiles, people who sipped wine while subtly dissecting you. Nathan was warm, curious, alive. He didn't need to impress anyone. And somehow that impressed everyone. Well, not everyone. My parents were never cruel to him. They were just composed. They said polite things with tight smiles, nodded a lot, asked vague questions about plans and stability. My mother would tilt her head slightly when he spoke. Not quite judgment, more like evaluation. My father never said anything directly, but I could read it in the way he poured Nathan half glasses of wine, like some invisible quota. Still, I believed love was enough. When Nathan proposed with a ring he'd designed himself, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful, blue like the ocean I dream about, I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. I was sure. We started planning the wedding. I wanted something small, elegant, full of meaning. He cared about the light, the music, the quiet joy of moments that weren't photographed. It was ours. Or at least I thought it was. Then came the engagement party. My parents insisted on hosting it at the estate. I knew it would be grander than Nathan liked, but I wanted to believe that this was the bridge. That once they saw how much he meant to me, they'd finally let go of their quiet reservations. I wish I could say the night was perfect, but the truth is, I saw the way Nathan's shoulders tensed with every conversation. I noticed how my mother's questions turned into soft interrogations, how my father's compliments came with invisible asterisks. And then the toast. My father raised his glass, smiling that composed, careful smile he saves for boardrooms. He spoke about family, about commitment, about how different paths sometimes cross in surprising ways. Then it happened. Of course, he said. Relationships take compromise, especially when people come from very different walks of life. But Emma has always had a generous heart. A few guests chuckled. I froze. He kept going, casually tossing in a line about being glad it wasn't a starving artist, and I felt something hollow open inside my chest. I didn't look at Nathan. I couldn't. I knew what I'd see in his face. I should have said something. Should have taken the mic, the moment, something. But I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that we'd talk later, that he knew I didn't think that way. But silence sometimes is louder than betrayal. And in that moment I realized, I wasn't just asking him to love me, I was asking him to endure them. And maybe that was never fair. Nathan didn't say a word on the drive home. He stared out the window with that same unreadable expression he wore when he was thinking too much, jaw tense, fingers tapping lightly on his knee like he was keeping time with a song only he could hear. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words were stuck behind my ribs. I kept thinking it was just a moment, just a bad joke, a slip, that maybe my father hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe Nathan would brush it off like he usually did. Maybe we were still okay. But when we pulled into the driveway, and he didn't move to get out of the car, I knew better. Finally, he said, "Was that really how they see me?" I swallowed. It was a joke. That wasn't a joke, Emma. His voice wasn't angry. It was soft, worn, and somehow that was worse. He turned to me, his eyes calm but sharp. "They think I'm temporary, like I'm something you'll outgrow." I shook my head. "That's not true, isn't it?" I hated the way he said it. Like he'd already decided. Like he knew something I wasn't ready to admit. "They don't know you like I do," I whispered. He smiled. Not kindly. "They don't want to." He got out of the car then. And I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it could explain what I couldn't say aloud. That maybe deep down, I'd been hoping they would change. That I'd been trying to keep one foot in each world. That I hadn't realized until tonight just how cruel that tightrope had become. The next morning he made coffee like he always did. But he didn't hum. And over the next few days, things got quieter. Not cold, Nathan didn't do cold. But distant. Like he was stepping back, just enough to see the picture more clearly. And maybe for the first time, he didn't like what he saw. We still went to venue visits. Still talked about flowers and menus and playlists. But his eyes no longer lit up when I talked about walking down the aisle. And I started noticing the absence of things I used to take for granted. The way he'd always pull me into his arms when I passed by. The half-kisses on my temple when he poured tea. The late-night scribbles in his sketchbook labeled our first home. One night, I found him on the balcony, looking out over the city. I wrapped my arms around him from behind. "Still want to marry me?" He hesitated. Just long enough to splinter something inside me. "I want to," he said. "I just don't know if I can marry into this." The bridal boutique smelled like peonies and promise. My mother came with me, of course. She always did. She smiled politely at the consultant, ordered sparkling water, and made notes in the little leather planner she carried like a badge. I stood on the platform, draped in silk and lace, staring at my reflection. I should have felt something, joy maybe, excitement. But instead I just felt tired. "Turn, sweetheart," my mother said. "Yes, that neckline is elegant. Very classic." I turned. The mirror showed a woman playing dress-up in a life that no longer felt hers. "This is the one," the consultant beamed. "He'll cry when he sees you." I swallowed hard. Would he? Because lately, Nathan hadn't been looking at me the same way. Not with resentment. Never that. But like he was waiting for me to make a decision I didn't even know I was being asked to make. That night, I found him packing a small bag. "Just for a few days," he said gently. "I need to think." "Think about what?" He looked at me then, and the quiet in his eyes felt louder than shouting. "About whether I can keep choosing someone who won't choose me in return." My knees went weak. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. "I did choose you. You chose me," he said. "But you never defended me. Not once. Not when it mattered." My lips parted, but there were no words brave enough to climb out. He leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. "Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room full of people who think you're not good enough for the person you love?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I do. Every Sunday dinner. Every charity gala. Every birthday brunch where I showed up without the right dress or the right conversation." He blinked. "I've always been the wrong kind of daughter," I added. "Too curious, too opinionated, not quiet enough. And the day I met you, I finally understood what it felt like to be seen without being measured." My voice broke. "You were the only place I ever felt enough." He sat beside me quietly. "So fight for it," he said softly. "Choose it. Out loud. Because I'm done pretending this version of us, where you hide me behind their smiles, is enough for me." The invitations were stacked neatly on the dining room table. Cream cardstock embossed lettering, golden trim. The kind of paper that whispers perfection and status the moment you hold it. I ran my fingers over them like they might burn me. In a way they already had. The silence in the apartment was unfamiliar. Nathan still hadn't returned. His absence filled the space like fog. Everything looked the same, but none of it felt real anymore. I stared at the RSVP line. "Kindly respond by the 12th. It was the 10th. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Emma, darling, did you go with the silk or the tulle for the veil? Lydia wants to know." "I'm not wearing a veil," I said quietly. Pause. "I don't understand." I stood up and walked to the window. The city below looked blurry through the glass, or maybe through my eyes. "I'm not getting married." A beat of silence. Then, "What nonsense are you talking about?" I took a breath. "You don't love him. You don't even respect him. You've made that clear since the beginning." And I thought I could balance it, that he'd eventually win you over, or that I could buffer the damage. But I was wrong. "Emma," No, I said louder now. He deserves to walk into a room and be seen as my choice, not my rebellion. She was quiet again, and then slowly like venom. Do you have any idea what people will say? I let that hang in the air, because I finally understood. She was never worried about love. Only optics. Only reputation. I don't care what they say, I whispered. And then I hung up. I didn't cry when I canceled the venue, or the caterer, or the string quartet I'd secretly hated from the start. I did cry when I got to Nathan's apartment. He opened the door, and for a moment we just stared at each other. I called it off, I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Your parents. They'll survive. Probably blamed some passing emotional instability. I smiled through the tears. Let them. He stepped aside to let me in. You're sure? I nodded. I don't want a wedding I have to apologize for. I don't want a marriage built on almosts. I want you, without the silence, without the shame. He pulled me into his arms then, and it felt like coming home after wandering for years in someone else's clothes. We didn't elope. We didn't post dramatic statements. We just started over. Quietly. Authentically. Together.
Somewhere between winter and spring, something changed in Elena. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't sudden. There was no slam of a door or a dramatic fight under dim kitchen lights. It was quieter than that, like a shift in gravity. Like the way your favorite mug slowly develops a crack you don't see until your coffee's already leaking onto your desk. We had been living together for almost 2 years, in a too-small apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cinnamon. The place was never clean, never quiet, but it felt like us. Cluttered, imperfect, real. I used to catch her humming in the mornings, hair wrapped in a towel, swaying slightly as she made tea in her faded college hoodie. It was one of the quiet joys of my life. Those early hours where the world hadn't quite begun, and we were still just two people trying to build something that felt like forever. But lately, her mornings were silent. She still made tea, but the humming had stopped. The small smiles, the casual touches. It was like someone had turned down the volume on her, just a little, but enough that I noticed. Her hands still moved the same way, but her eyes didn't linger. Her kisses landed soft but hollow, like she was reading a script, hitting the marks without the meaning. I told myself it was work. She'd recently been given more responsibility at the firm, late nights, early meetings, constant calls. Her sleep schedule became erratic, and her phone never left her side. I would have believed the stress excused completely if it weren't for the way she laughed at her screen sometimes. Not like she was watching something funny, more like she was being seen, wanted. I didn't want to pry. I've always hated the idea of becoming someone else's detective. I believed in giving space, trusting that when the time was right, she'd talk to me. And she did talk, just not about anything that mattered. We discussed groceries, chores, that leaky pipe under the sink. She asked about my work, nodded in all the right places, but never really listened. Her eyes drifted often toward her phone, toward the window, toward somewhere I couldn't follow. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and find her sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, thumb frozen mid-scroll, her face blank, unreadable. Everything okay? I'd whisper. Just couldn't sleep, she'd murmur back, slipping under the covers without another word. I didn't press. I was scared that if I asked for the truth, I'd get it. The thing is, you don't notice the exact moment someone starts to leave. You just start making excuses for their absence. And I had a lot of excuses. Work, stress, hormones, the weather, anything to explain why her eyes no longer held the same warmth. Why her hugs felt more like rituals than comforts. I told myself she still loved me. Maybe she did. Or maybe she loved the version of me she remembered. The one who hadn't yet noticed how the walls were starting to thin between us. But love, real love, doesn't vanish overnight. It dissolves. One silent breakfast at a time. One unanswered. How was your day? One more night spent staring at the back of someone you used to feel at home with. And still I stayed. Because when you built your life around someone, even the cracks feel like part of the design. You don't realize how much space a person takes up in your world until you begin to lose them in pieces. Not all at once, no. Elena didn't disappear like a light going out. She dimmed. There were 1,000 little nothings that began to feel like something. The way she started taking her coffee, to go, instead of sitting with me on the balcony like we used to, how her responses to, "I love you" became soft, automatic. "Me too," instead of "I love you too." It was subtle like erosion, like wind smoothing away the edges of something once sharp and sure. We still had our routines, Friday night takeout, Sunday morning laundry, but they'd grown brittle, performative. It was like watching a stage play you'd seen too many times, waiting for a plot twist that never came. And then there were the phones. God, the phones. I never thought of myself as insecure. I never cared much about lock screens or late-night scrolling. But when you sit across from someone who used to make eye contact while they spoke, really looked at you, and now they're half listening, thumb flicking over glass, it does something to you. She started smiling at messages she wouldn't show me, turning away when they came in, replying just a little too fast. Sometimes her phone would buzz, and she'd press the power button before even glancing up at me. I told myself it was harmless. I wanted to believe the best, because that's what you do when you're in love. You give the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt is all you have left. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I didn't touch it. I just stared at the name that flashed across the screen. Lucas. No last name. Just a name I'd never heard before. Followed by a message that would haunt me more for its casual tone than anything explicit. Can't stop thinking about earlier. When can we talk? I remember the moment vividly. The hum of the fridge, the dripping of the faucet, the sound of water running down the drain in the next room. Everything ordinary, everything intimate, and yet suddenly none of it felt mine anymore. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, hair wet, cheeks flushed from the heat of the water, I looked at her like a stranger had walked into my home. She smiled, kissed my shoulder, asked what movie I wanted to watch. I said nothing, not because I didn't have questions, but because I already knew the answers. And still, I didn't confront her. Not that night, not the next. Instead, I folded myself into the quiet. I watched, I listened, I waited. I needed to be sure. And maybe, deep down, I needed her to confess on her own, to give me some part of her that still believed I deserved the truth. That moment didn't come. Not yet. Instead, more changes followed. She bought new clothes, started wearing perfume again, left the house with a kind of nervous energy I hadn't seen since our first dates. It wasn't for me. I knew that. It's strange how much you can forgive when you're afraid of letting go. I kept holding on, trying to grip what was left, even as it slipped through my fingers like sand. But the thing about pretending everything is fine is that it exhausts you, and eventually, pretending becomes impossible. It was raining the night everything fell apart. Not a dramatic storm, just a steady drizzle that blurred the windows and turned streetlights into soft, weeping halos. The kind of rain that keeps secrets, that muffles everything but your own thoughts. I had come home early. Not by design. It was a canceled meeting, the kind of thing that would have thrilled me months ago. More time with her, more hours shared in our small world. But as I turned the key in the lock, I felt something tighten in my chest. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the kind of knowing that comes only after months of willful blindness. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. No music. No kettle whistling. Just a low murmur of voices behind the closed bedroom door. I stood still for a moment, just listening. Her voice, soft and warm, like it used to be with me. And a man's voice, low, easy, confident. Familiar in that unsettling way something becomes when it doesn't belong. I didn't move. Not right away. I should have barged in, demanded answers. Instead, I stood there, staring at the books on our shelf. The photo of us from last summer smiling by the sea, the half-dead plant she swore she'd revive one day. I was shaking, but not with anger, with grief. A grief so pure and quiet it didn't need words. When the door opened and they saw me, the world stopped. His name was Lucas. The name I'd seen. The name I'd feared. He froze. She gasped, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound came, like the guilt had stolen her breath. He left first. Coward. Didn't look me in the eye. Just brushed past like I was furniture. Elena tried to speak, but all that came out was my name. A whisper. An apology dressed in disbelief. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I simply walked past her, picked up my coat, and left. I remember the sound of rain on my shoulders, the way my shoes soaked through in seconds. I remember the smell of the air, wet asphalt, jasmine from the neighbor's garden, betrayal. I walked for hours. No direction, just the rhythm of my footsteps and the storm inside me. When I came back, she was sitting on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, face pale and hollow. She had cried. Good. But I didn't care. Please, she said. Just that one word. Like it held all the apologies she couldn't form. I looked at her and felt nothing. Not hatred. Not rage. Just the echo of a life that was no longer mine. Was it worth it? I asked. She didn't answer, because she knew it didn't matter. The days that followed were weightless. Not because they were easy. Grief is never easy. But because everything that had tethered me to the life I knew had been cut. The routines, the familiar sounds of her laughter, the phantom feeling of her hand in mine, all gone. She texted, called, left voicemails at 2 a.m. that started with sobs and ended in silence. She sent long messages explaining, then apologizing, then begging. She even tried to sound casual at one point, as if this could all be undone by pretending it hadn't happened. It was a mistake, she wrote. It didn't mean anything. I miss you. You know I love you. But I didn't reply, because mistake doesn't explain a choice made over and over again. It doesn't cover late-night whispers, secret smiles, or unlocked bedroom doors. It doesn't excuse the way she let another man into the space we had built from laughter, compromise, and Sunday breakfasts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erosion. And by the time she noticed the damage, there was nothing left to salvage. We met once, weeks later. Her idea, a quiet cafe we used to love, now tainted by awkward stares and unspoken history. She looked tired, as though guilt had hollowed her out. I didn't feel triumphant, just sad. She cried again, told me it had been a moment of weakness, that she'd been feeling lonely, that I had become too predictable, too steady, as if those were sins. I didn't think it would matter, she admitted, eyes red. I thought I could come back to you, that you'd forgive me. And that's when I realized something. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had expected forgiveness. Counted on it. Like I was a checkpoint in a game, a place to return to once the thrill wore off. Safe, familiar, but I wasn't her home anymore. I looked at her then, really looked at her, this woman I had once imagined a life with, and felt nothing but exhaustion. You left me before he ever touched you, I said quietly. You just never had the courage to admit it. She tried to speak, but I stood up, paid for her coffee, mine untouched, and walked away. The hardest part wasn't leaving her. It was accepting that the version of us I'd been holding on to only ever existed in my memory. And now, when people ask me why I didn't take her back, why I didn't let her prove she'd changed, I just smile. Because some things, once broken, don't make a sound. They just stop being whole. AITA for not taking her back? Some people think so. They say I should have given her another chance. That love means forgiveness. But to me, love also means respect. And once that's gone, everything else is just noise.
I never believed in love at first sight, not until Daniel smiled at me during a charity book fair, handing me a copy of The Little Prince with a post-it that said, "For the girl who still sees stars." We were different in all the obvious ways. He wore tailored jackets and spoke fluent Latin. I wore bookstore tote bags and had a chipped keychain from my first job. But somehow, we worked. He listened when I spoke, made space for my silence, and laughed like my thoughts were magic. When we danced at his friend's wedding and he whispered, "You make rooms feel like home," I believed him. Every word. 6 months in, I met his family. They lived in the kind of house that echoes, 3 stories, high ceilings, polished floors that click under nervous heels. His mother, Elaine, kissed my cheek with precision. His father, Robert, nodded with the warmth of a boardroom introduction. His sister Claire smiled, but her eyes flicked down to my shoes, and something behind them dimmed. I remember that first dinner. The table was long enough to seat 12, but we were only 5. The food was plated like art, each course explained like a museum exhibit. I spent more time trying to remember which fork to use than actually tasting anything. Claire asked what I did, and when I told her I was a senior editor at a mid-sized publishing house, she nodded vaguely. So, like, book TikTok? I smiled, unsure if it was meant to be funny. Still, I thought I held my own. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, his thumb brushing mine like reassurance. And afterward, he said, "They liked you." I promise. They're just reserved. I wanted to believe that. I convinced myself every cool smile, every loaded compliment, every overly generous offer to help with the wedding budget was their version of kindness. That some families love quietly, in crisp white linens and barely touched wine glasses. I thought that if I smiled enough, said thank you often enough, dressed well enough, I could belong. When we got engaged, it felt like proof that I had been accepted. The proposal was intimate, just us on a rainy rooftop with fairy lights and Daniel's hand shaking as he opened the box. The ring was understated, a delicate oval set on a thin band, chosen, he said, because it looks like something you'd wear if no one was watching. I cried. Said yes. Called my mother, who cried too. Daniel's family, however, hosted a formal dinner 2 weeks later, an engagement celebration with hand-addressed invitations and a dress code that required me to buy a new dress. Nothing too loud, Elaine texted, just something elegant and timeless. At the dinner, I laughed at the right jokes, answered polite questions about my childhood, and tried to keep up with Claire's commentary on destination wedding venues. Daniel sat beside me, quiet but steady, as if his presence was enough to anchor me. Maybe it would have been, if not for the moment that changed everything. Claire's phone buzzed on the table. She had stepped away to take a call earlier and forgotten it when she returned. I wasn't trying to pry. But when the phone lit up, my name was there, tagged in a message. And the group chat's name was impossible to miss. Inner Circle Ring. The last message, glowing softly on the screen, read, "Can we please address the elephant in the room? She's lovely, but I'm getting exhausted pretending she's the one." I froze. My heart, once steady, began to stumble. And just like that, the room around me shifted. For a moment, the world didn't move. Claire's phone sat there like a lit fuse on the linen tablecloth, elegant, unbothered, unaware it had just cracked something open. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even leaning toward it. But when your name appears in a message thread you were never meant to see, your body reacts before your conscience can intervene. My eyes flicked down. She's lovely, but I'm getting exhausted pretending she's the one. Then another bubble followed, right beneath it. Daniel has a pattern, he always needs to rescue someone. There were 6 participants in the chat. I saw the names clearly. Claire. Elaine. Robert. Daniel. Olivia, his cousin. Evan, his childhood friend. It was like being locked out of a house you thought was yours, and suddenly seeing your name on a no-entry sign. I looked up, tried to keep my face still. The dinner went on. Forks clinked. A waiter refilled wine glasses. Elaine was discussing table runners for spring weddings. Daniel was distracted, his hand absent-mindedly stroking the stem of his glass. I could have said something. Asked outright. Made a scene. But that would have been too easy, and far too dramatic for a family like his. Instead, I waited. Claire picked up her phone eventually. She didn't notice anything. Her lipstick was too perfect for suspicion. Later, in the car, Daniel held my hand as he drove. "You were amazing tonight," he said. "They really see how happy you make me." I turned to look at him, really look, at the man who had once kissed the back of my hand during a rainstorm like we lived in a black and white film. And for the first time, I saw something else. Someone who had let people talk about me behind my back for months, maybe years, and said nothing. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He nodded, eyes still on the road. "What's the inner circle?" The silence was immediate. His fingers tightened on the wheel. He didn't answer right away, which told me everything. "You went through Claire's phone," he asked softly, not accusing, just disappointed. "I didn't go through anything," I said. "It was on the table. I saw my name. I saw yours." He exhaled. A long, low sound like the slow release of air from a balloon that's been stretched too tight. "It's just a private family chat," he finally said. "We joke around. Nothing serious." "Is that what I am in there? A joke?" He didn't answer. I turned my face toward the window, let the silence wrap around us. I thought about all the dinners where I'd forced smiles. All the polite condescension I'd swallowed like wine. All the times I'd walked into a room where everyone already had a verdict, and I never even knew I was on trial. And the man who was supposed to be on my side. He had been in the jury box. The next few days passed like the soft hum of an old refrigerator, low, constant, barely noticeable until you realize how much it's filling the room. Daniel didn't bring it up again. Neither did I. He kissed me on the forehead in the mornings, made coffee, read emails. On the outside, everything still resembled love. But something was missing, some invisible thread between us had loosened. I replayed the chat in my head 100 times. The words themselves weren't vulgar. They were worse, polished, casual, coded. "She's lovely, but exhausting. A little rough around the edges. Daniel always finds strays." They didn't call me names. They didn't need to. Their judgment was too refined for that. It came dressed in well-written grammar and emojis that softened cruelty with confetti. And Daniel? He'd been quiet in the thread. But that silence. That was the part that echoed. One message in particular kept haunting me. "Let's just get through the engagement dinner. She means well." I couldn't decide which part broke me more, the condescension, or the fact that he called our engagement dinner something to get through. Like it was a layover on the way to his real life. I found myself retreating into smaller spaces. My office. Cafes. The corner of the bedroom where the sunlight came in crooked and kind. I told myself I needed to focus on work, on my authors, my deadlines. But really, I was just stalling. The conversations we weren't having began piling up like unopened letters. Then one evening, Daniel came home with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My mom's looking at country clubs again," he said, loosening his tie. "She thinks she found one that even you'd like." He said it lightly, teasingly. The kind of joke that might have made me laugh once. This time, I didn't. Why does she think I wouldn't like it? He paused, taken off guard. "You know what I mean," he said. "She's trying. Everyone is." "No," I said, quietly but firmly. "They're performing. There's a difference." He sat down across from me. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Too bare. "I don't understand what you want me to do, Em." I looked at him, really looked at him. And I realized, he didn't. He had grown up in this, families that didn't talk directly, feelings smoothed over with Chardonnay, conflict hidden under dry wit and floral centerpieces. He thought this was normal. "I wanted you to defend me," I said finally. "Not behind their backs. Not after the fact. I wanted to know I wasn't alone at that table." He looked down, ashamed, or maybe just tired. "I didn't think it would matter. That's the problem." The morning I left, it was raining. Not the cinematic kind, not dramatic thunder or floods, just a soft, endless drizzle that made everything feel like it was dissolving. I hadn't packed everything. Just enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to remember who I was before I started editing myself to fit their world. Daniel was still asleep. He looked peaceful, even kind, tangled in the sheets we picked out together from a store I couldn't afford. I watched him for a moment, wondering how long I'd been in love with the idea of him. The man who once surprised me with pastries from the bakery I mentioned in passing. The man who kissed me on bookstore steps. The man who, when it mattered, didn't speak. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. Everything I hadn't said was already folded into the silence we'd built between us. I moved into a friend's spare bedroom. Nothing fancy. The window sticks. The radiator hums too loud at night. But it feels mine. And slowly, quietly, I began to feel like me again. No rehearsed smiles. No second guessing what to wear to dinner. No checking my words for polish and pedigree. Just breath. Books. Music. Sleep that came without the weight of pretending. A week later, Daniel showed up. He didn't call ahead. Just stood outside the apartment building, holding a folded umbrella and a face full of what-ifs. "I didn't know you were hurting that much," he said. I nodded. "You didn't ask." He swallowed. "I thought love was enough." I smiled. "It is. But respect is the part that makes it last." He looked like he wanted to say more, but for once, he didn't. And I appreciated that. Because some endings don't need speeches. They just need truth. I never posted about the breakup. Never responded to the quiet whispers that followed. Claire sent me a long message, part apology, part PR statement. Elaine sent a wedding gift back with a note that read "Return to sender." I smiled. Some people only know how to love conditionally. That's their limit. And I no longer live within it.